accidentally put M instead of N, you lose a point. It is really frustrating. I was doing some exercise this morning in class for the lab portion, and we were doing the patient registration and all that, with the patient name and.
All right, so the last thing we're going to do tonight is access basics. So the first thing that we need to do in order to deal with access basics is that I want to talk a little bit about what a database actually is and why you might even care about doing databases and so on. So this is all in your on the handout called Access Basics, and I am going to open it up because I wanted to show you something about it, if it will allow me to. Access Basics. All right. So there are a couple of key things that I wanted to mention about Access Basics. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what exactly a database really is. And we're going to go through and talk about how you use databases and so on. And then we're going to actually go in and create a database in Access. So right at the moment, I don't want you to have Access open. I don't want you to have Excel open. I don't want you to have anything open, actually. And what I wanted to do is to talk a little bit about what databases really are. So like I said in the booklet on page 3 and also on my screen, databases are organized collections of information. So you deal with databases every single day of your life. You deal with them all of the time, whether or not you realize that you are dealing with databases. So what databases include things like address books, recipe card files, telephone books, actual real books. Anything that has information in it is a database. So if I look at, for example, my book. In my book, I have at the beginning of it, I have the table of contents. That's a database. It has information telling me where I can go to certain stuff. In the San Jose City College catalog, this is a database. It's a database of all of the classes and degrees that exist at City College. This is a database. A database that you are using right now is Canvas. Canvas is a database because in Canvas, if I click onto Home, it is saying courses, the course number in Canvas for this class is 16622. And so this is the main page on class number 16622. Databases are everywhere. And the way that you organize databases in a computerized database is that databases are made up of what are known as tables. And tables are all of the groups of information grouped together. So in a people database, it might be everybody whose last name starts with B, or everybody who in a recipe database, it might be all of the vegetarian recipes. That might be in the vegetarian table. And in the meat dishes table would be all of the meat dishes. And in the, whatever, that is the table. So tables are not the biggest, because the database is the biggest, but the next biggest collection of the data are the tables. And then below the tables, tables are made up of records. The records are the individual groupings of all of the data pieces. So in the case of a people database, it would be the person. In the case of a recipe database, it would be the recipe. In the case of an address book, it would be, you know, the address for the specific person or company or whatever. The records are then broken up into fields, and the fields are the smallest unit in a database. So the fields in a database, for a person database, it would be things like first name, last name, street address, zip code, email address, phone number. In a student database, it might include things like class 1 that they're taking, class 2 that they're taking. It might be the grade in class 1 that they received or whatever. So records are, so the smallest unit is a field, and a group of fields together create a record, and a bunch of records together create a table, and one or more tables produces the database. So in Access, a database is broken up into tables, which are broken up into records, which are broken up into fields. That makes sense? The words that just came out of my mouth probably are on 2 exams. Now in the book I said, or in the handout, I said that every table must have a primary key field. That's not really true. If you want a database to be relational, that is, that you want to be able to take the data from one database and link it to the data in another database, then there needs to be a primary key field so that the computer knows that the first name in table 1 matches the first name in table 2. Otherwise, you can't connect the 2 together. A primary field needs to be unique and needs to be uniquely identifying. So like I said, in an HR database, social security number would be a good choice. In a student database, the student ID number would be a good choice because only you have your student ID number. In a order processing thing, the order number might be the primary key, or the customer's email address might be the primary key, or the customer's username might be the primary key. Something like that, something that is unique, easily identifiable. So this is an example of a database. So this is, an old school Rolodex. And the whole thing would be the database. And the database is then made up of records. Those records are made up into tables. Inside of the records, we have fields. So this is the information about Leland Stanford from Stanford University fame. And Leland Stanford, his current address is 395 Campus Drive, Stanford, California, 94305. If you do a Google search on what is 395 Campus Drive in Stanford, California, you will notice that that is the street address for the mausoleum. The mausoleum is the crypt where Leland Stanford's remains and Jane Stanford's remains are currently residing and
They're
have
dead?
been. Yeah, they died in the, Leland Stanford died in like 1897.
They're the
Something.
founder of
Yeah, they're the founders of Stanford University.
Oh, so
Um,
they're supposed to be-
And their son was actually the reason why it's called why it's called Stanford University is because it's named after their son, Leland Stanford Jr. And he died in 1885, something like that, 1886, something like that. Well, they're only, it's only the Stanford family that resides in the mausoleum. So anyway, this is the actual street address. I was having fun when I put this together. Actual street address of where they are.
Yeah,
Anyway.
you put that people so that
Yeah.
students won't go and
Well, you know.
no.
So the cool thing is that the difference between a computer database and a paper database in terms of what they really are, there's nothing different. However, computer databases are better because they're easier to update, they're easier to maintain, it's harder to create reports and reuse data in a paper database. If you have ever tried to take like information on a piece of paper, on a paper Rolodex and create like a report of putting like labels on to send out mailers to them, it's a lot easier to do it if it's in a actual computerized database than a paper database. All right, there are basically two types of databases. There are flat file databases where all of the data live in one spot. They all live in one table. Every paper database is a flat file database. Relational databases generally are better. The idea behind a relational database is that you can have some of the data stored in one table, other data in the database stored in another table, and then you can link the two together and it's easier to maintain the information. So an example of this would be MyWeb or Canvas. So in this example here, I have an example of what might be in, in Canvas or whatever. Yeah.
I just want to mention that for patients, clinical and admin database, two different databases that you can interface or enter.
Right. So those are relational databases because you can interface the data from multiple sources. But the only way that that works is if there is a primary key that is used to tie the data in database number 1 with the data that are in database number 2. So in this example here, Jane Stanford is taking IHUM and freshman English and physics 51, and the teacher is teaching IHUM, and the teacher has these students in her class, and the roster is then generated from the teacher's data, which is the class information table, and the student information table. Well, how do they interact? Because the student ID number is uniquely identified. So the student ID number for the student is the primary key. The class ID number would be the class name, or the class ID number or something like that would be the one that would be in the class data. And then the roster is being generated automatically by whatever happens in the student information and the teacher's information, the class information. So the teacher says, I want to teach IHUM. that means that the iHum all of a sudden appears and the students then say, oh, I want to take iHum. So then they sign up for iHum. When they sign up for iHum, it automatically adds them or adds their ID number to the class information table and their name and ID number from the student information onto the roster. And the class name is coming from the class name. So that the roster part automatically gets generated because the student table and the class table interact with one another. So for example, when I go to, or when you go to Canvas and you click on, I don't know, people, you see all of the people in our class. Why do you see all the people in our class? Because everybody who's in our class shows up when you click on a people. And when you sign up, it automatically adds you to the people section. Well, how did you sign up? You signed up by going into MyWeb and saying, I want to take this class. The MyWeb database interacts with the Canvas database. Takes the data and passes it along. Well, the only way that that works is if the data pieces, first of all, are compatible, and second of all, are the same and unique for the stuff that's unique. Because otherwise, when Joe goes in, Joe sees Joe's stuff, I see my stuff, you see your stuff. Well, how does the machine know that you are you? Well, the machine knows that you are you because one of the things that you did is you told the machine, my user ID is this, and the password I want to use is that. And that information is then stored in the database. Stored as a record in that database. Yes?
So, like this one, the primary key means it's a unique number.
It could be a number, it could be text. The primary key is going to be something that is unique. Right, the student number would be the unique identifier in a student database. In a company database, it might be the order number. Every time a new sale gets created, a new order number gets created. Well, you can't have two order numbers that are the same, otherwise that would mess everything up. So the order number could be used as the primary key in a purchasing database. I'm sorry? Yeah, so a foreign key, so the primary key is the primary key for this database. The foreign key is the primary key on that database. So let's say you have an ordering system and you're looking at the order database. In the order database, the primary key would be the order number. But when a customer buys something, there's a customer database with the customer's name and their customer's ID number and whatever it is, and the things that the customer bought and all of that kind of stuff is in the customer database. The customer's primary key might be their email address, or it might be their ID name, or whatever it is. From the ordering database's point of view, the customer's unique thingy is the foreign key. From the customer's point of view, the order number is the order number's foreign key. So the foreign key is the primary key on the other side of the linked database. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So again, like in here, if I go, if I go in and I click onto Mark Branham, and it says in Mark Branham that my, that my picture is here and stuff. Well, the reason that my picture is here is because I uploaded my picture. So there is a field called, I don't know, picture or something like that. And it has as its value my picture, because that's what I told it to. All right. So to enter in data in Access, you have basically two ways. One way to do it is directly into the database itself. This is by going into the table and directly entering the data directly into the table. Most of the time, you don't do that. Most of the time, you create a form, and then you use the form to update the database. So when I go into Access, if I wanted to really change my picture, I would use the form to change my picture. I'm not actually going into the database. I don't even have access to the actual database. But one of the senior administrators for ITSS, they could go in and change my picture by going into the database itself and going into the table and literally changing it in the table itself.
So if you wanted to get there, you'd have to hack it, right?
Well, I could either hack it or I would use my form. I'd use the form that they've set up to make it work. Because there are basically two ways of entering in data. You can either enter it directly or you can use a form. And what forms do is forms take fields and present them in an easy to use fill in the blank format. When you enter data in form view, you are entering data into the database. It's as if you are in the data sheet view and you're doing it in the table view itself and literally putting it into the table. Access also calls it data sheet. Sometimes they call it the data sheet view. Sometimes they call it the table view. It's the same thing. Reports are used to summarize the data. Usually you do that when you want to print something or you want to if you want to create like a temporary transcript, an unofficial transcript, you can do that by going into my web and saying, print out my unofficial transcript. That's a report. Pulling the data from the databases, putting it all onto one spot, allowing you to summarize and print out the data. Query is one of the most misunderstood things in databases, but they are really, really cool.
Search, right?
No, they're not for searching. What they are used for is two things. They are used to sort and filter the data, but more importantly, they are used to extract the data to make it faster and easier to sort and filter that data. So using a query, it allows you to run a report on just a small section of the database. So here's an example of why you want to use a query. And we'll talk more about queries, not next week, but in a couple of weeks. But let's say you want to run a report showing all of the classes that you are currently enrolled in. City College has been around for 100 years almost. 1921, 22 will be so in 2022 it's going to be our 100th year. We're coming up onto our 100th year. We've been around for over 90 years. So if you just want to show all of the classes that you are currently enrolled in, do you need to have access to the data from 1934? So why would you search the entire database? Because the entire database includes 1934. You only really need to search, I mean, technically you only really need to search this year, but let's say you wanted to search all of the classes that you've ever taken. And maybe you started taking classes, I don't know, 10 years ago. It would be reasonable to, instead of searching all 100 years worth of data, to just search the last 15, 20 years worth of data. That's what a query allows you to do. The query says, only grab all of the data from 2000 to 2020. And then within that query, look for the stuff that Mark Branham did. That way, instead of searching the entire database, you're just searching this little snippet.
I thought it wasn't a search.
Well, it's not. It's a query allows you to isolate just the stuff that you want.
I'm sorry.
And then search within that small section.
The first time I seen query, it was kind of embarrassing. I was in an embarrassing spot, but I seen them do a query on a radio, like my name in my vehicle. That kind of a query.
So a query technically just means a question. It means to ask a question. And what you're really doing is you're asking the database, show me all of the data in this, with this criteria from 2000 to 2020 only. And then that way, instead of having to search all of the entire database, you can just search what you want and you'll be able to find it much faster.
Amazing how they did this.
So anyway, that is the basics of how databases work. Are there questions on this? Does this make sense? Okay. So what I want you to do now is to actually open up a database. So we are going to actually create a little database. And to do that, what you want to do is, this is on page 6. We want to create a database by launching Microsoft Access. And when you launch Microsoft Access, we want to click on to blank desktop database. So click on the blank database. And then it's going to say, what do you want to name the database? And the database we're going to name is Our Students. Pay attention to where it's saving it. So mine is saving it in my Documents folder. If you want to save it like on your thumb drive, save it to your thumb drive. To save it to your thumb drive or whatever, click on the little browse and tell it to save it someplace else. It really doesn't matter where you save it, as long as you remember where it's been saved so that you can publish it. Our Students.
Our students.
But with your name on it. We need to put in your name on it as well. Sorry. So we need to do like Branham, Mark, Our Students. And then click on to create.
Our students?
Yeah.
Just on the student.
Put in your name and then Our Students.
Oh, okay. Name first, huh?
Yeah.
It's been correct.
Once you have created the database, it should look exactly like this. This should be exactly what's on your screen. Anybody not at this stage? Everybody here? Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create fields. Because again, a table is made up of fields. So we want to create some fields. Right at the moment, this table is called table 1. We'll be changing that later on, but right at the moment, we're going to create a new field. So by default, a field is generated for you called ID. We want to change that. So to change the ID field, we want to double click where it says ID and then type in student ID. Page 7. And then you can either press enter or press tab to accept it. And in Access, there are a number of different types of fields that you can have. The difference between Access and FileMaker and MySQL and the other databases that are around are what types of fields are allowed. That's the biggest difference. So in Access, we can do short text and numbers and currency, which is a kind of number, and date and time, which is kind of like a text. Yes, no, which is a true, false, 1-0 binary Boolean type situation. Lookup we'll talk about later. Rich text allows you to do like bold and italics. Long text allows you to put in more than 255 letters, which is what short text is limited to, 256 really. Attachments allows you to put in other objects. So an example of an attachment field would be this. This would be an attachment field, the picture. So most fields are going to be text fields. Most fields are text. So where it says click to add, click on that drop-down menu and choose short text. And when it says field 1, we want to put in first name.
First name?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then we want to create another one, another short text field that we're going to call last name. And then another short text field that we're going to call email address.
What was the second one?
Last name.
Last name.
Oh.
It's on page 7. So ends exercise number 2. Yes.
Do you think for email address, do you need the whole, both two terms, email and address?
Probably not, but in this case, I'm doing it. But you're right. It could probably do just email. We could also probably not say last name and say like, I don't know, surname or something like that. But
No, I mean, as many databases I've seen, I've never seen email address. It sounds a little redundant.
All right. Exercise number 3, page 8. We want to save. Now, to save, there are a couple of things that I want to point out about save. So if I click onto the file button, and then I go down to where it says save, I click on to save. And when I do that, it's going to bring up the save as screen. And where it says table name, I need to give my table a table. I need to give it a name. I do not want to call it table 1. I want to call it the student information table.
Where did you start at? Page what?
5 to save, we will save.
We're on page 8.
Page 8.
Sorry, Professor, 5 to save.
And what did you do with that table? Can you start that over again, please?
I saved it.
He didn't do anything.
I didn't do anything to it.
Okay.
I just did, I literally did step 1, click the file button, then click save. In the save as field for the table name, enter student information table and click OK. So I'm naming my table student information table and I click OK. So now over here on the left-hand side where it says all access objects, we have student information table. And at the top up here, it also says student information table. One of the things to know about saving in a database is that saving does not mean saving the data. Saving in a database means saving the structure of the database, saving the database itself. When you type in data, you are saving the data. there is no, one of the things that sometimes people ask is, how come I can't undo my data entry? And the answer is because by typing in the data, you are saving the data. And once you save something, you can't undo it because it's been saved. So typing in the data is saving the data. Now, they do let you also click on to save, and that gives you the false sense that you've actually done something beyond what automatically happens. But it really just saving means saving the entire infrastructure of the database. All right. So far, we've been doing it, we've been creating our database using the table view. There is another way of doing it. And in Access, there are many different views based on what you are doing. So right now I am in the table. So because I'm looking at the table, if I click onto the view drop-down menu, there are two things that I can do in a table. There are two views in a table. By the way, this is an important thing when you do the Access midterm. There are two views in the table. The two views that are in the table are the datasheet view and the design view. The datasheet view is where you look at the data and enter in the data. That's what the datasheet view is for. The design view is for where you can design the actual data, or design the actual table, I mean, and modify what the fields are, add new fields, rearrange the fields, change the data type on the fields. That kind of stuff is in the design view. So on page 9, we want to go into the design view, and we want to verify that the student ID is the primary key. The reason we know that it's the primary key is because there's this little key that's on it. If for some reason we didn't want that to be the primary key, we could click on, now don't do this, we could click on, I don't know, last name, and click on a primary key, and then that would make last name be the primary key. But we don't want last name to be the primary key. We want student ID to be the primary key. What we don't want is we don't want Access to automatically create the student ID number. So right now it's set to be auto number. I don't want it to be auto number. So I want to change that from being the auto number type to being the number type. The other thing that I want to do, and I strongly recommend that you do, is that on any database that you work on, that you should always define what the descriptions are for each of the fields. It doesn't have to be as long as the way that I wrote it, but it needs to be enough information so that a new person taking over your database will understand perhaps why you built the database the way you built it. So in here, student ID, this would be the, I don't know, the ID number for the student. And the first name would be the first name of the student. And the last name would be the last name, the surname of the student. And the email address would be the email address of the student. Something like that. Yes.
So the numeric data are pretty self-explanatory. The ones that are alphabetic, those are supposed to be demographics, right?
Not necessarily.
Student demographics.
Well, in this case, they are. In this case, the student ID is the student ID number. The first name is their first name, last name, and email address.
They're all really self-explanatory.
Right. So I think in this case, it's pretty obvious that first name is the first name of the student. The main reason that you might want to put in first name of the student and stuff is that, so this is the student information table. If I now have a new table that I call the faculty table, and in the faculty table, I have first name, last name, email address.
And you have an
Those would be the first name of the faculty person, not the first name of the student.
But
So by just saying first name, it may not be obvious which first name you're referring to. And so by putting in the description what the first name refers to, it can perhaps help you remember later on why this particular table has those particular
but
fields.
then when you're going to make a faculty database, you're going to name it faculty information table, right?
Well, yeah. And so, but then that way, it makes it just easier on you so that you don't have to think about whether this is the faculty information or the student information. And this doesn't show up anyplace unless you ask it to. So it's not going to show up on the screen or anything. It's just going to be, if you go into the help information about it, it'll say, this is the, I've forgotten which thing this is supposed to be for, that kind of stuff. All right. So that is the end of exercise number 4. We are halfway through the assignment. The next thing we want to do is we want to create some records. So to create records, we're going to go back to the data sheet view. So to go to the data sheet view, again, we click on a view and we go down to data sheet. And we go to the data sheet view, it says you've made changes, you need to save the table. So click yes, because we want to save the changes that we've made. And we can then enter in our data. So on page 10, I'm going to enter in the data that I have on page 10. So we've got student ID number 1 is going to be Robert Johnson. And his email address is robert.johnson@fake.com. And then student ID number 2.
Robert Johnson?
Page 10. Is going to be George Smith. And he's george.smith@fake.com. Just like in Excel, you can drag the field so that it's a little bit easier to view, to read, to change the width. You can have it auto fit to the size that you want it to be, or you can click and drag it. Record number 3 is going to be Sally Student. She's at sally.student@fake.com. And then student number 4 is Jane Doe, and she's jane.doe@fake.com. So now my database has 4 records. It's got Robert and George and Sally and Jane. One of the things you may notice is that this looks an awful lot like a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
The data sheet view in a database looks almost the same as a spreadsheet in a, spreadsheet. And in fact, it's relatively easy to take data from a spreadsheet and put it into a database and vice versa. But they are not the same thing. And I'll show you a couple of reasons why that is in a little bit. Questions? Any problems? Okay. Number 6, page 11. So one of the other things that we can do is we can create a form. So far we've just been entering data in the data sheet view. Now what I want to do is I want to create a form. And what forms are is forms, again, make it easier to enter records into your database. They make a simple, a simpler way of displaying your your data, as well as to make it easier for you to enter in your data. In the book, I said, forms present fields in an easy to use, fill in the blank format. And that is absolutely what forms are used for. So to create a form, I'm going to click on a create. And when I click on a create in the forms group, I am going to click on form wizard.
Sir, can you do that again?
I haven't done anything yet.
Okay, I just finished the name.
I click on to create, and then I click on, no, on create.
Just next to home.
Next to home is create,
Okay, create, and then what?
form wizard.
Form wizard, okay.
And in form wizard, I can then select the fields that I want to use. If I am using a relational database and I have more than one table, I can use a single form to enter data into multiple tables, because the tables would show up over here and I would be able to add more fields than just the fields for this table. But in this case, this is just a simple little database that only has one set. So I could either add them in one at a time, or I could click onto the double arrow and move them all over. I want to do everything. And then I'm going to click on to next. And it says, what layout do we want it to be in? Columns, tables, justified. There's really no reason to do data sheet, because the data sheet is the data sheet view. It would look exactly like the table view. So, but I am going to do columns. And then before you click finish, do not click finish. One of the things that you'll notice is that the title of the form is always going to be exactly what it was. This is not the student information table. This is the student information form. So I want to change that to say student information form. One of the things that I strongly advise you to do is anytime that you create any object in Access, that you always include the type of object with its name. So you'll notice that I named my table, I didn't name my table student information, I named my table student information table. I'm not naming my form student information, I'm naming my form student information form. And the reason that I do that is so that, yes, it says tables and under that are all the tables, and yes, it says forms and under that are all the forms, but it's really easy to accidentally look at this and think that this is the table or not. By putting in the name, I find it easier to remember. If you've already named it something else and you want to rename it, you can absolutely rename it. But in order to do that, you have to close it first. So if you need to rename something, you have to close it. Once it's been closed, then you can right-click onto it and you can go down to rename and you could rename it. Click onto the X in the upper right-hand corner. Yes.
I think I kind of got the end result that the data is going to input in the form by itself.
Right. The data are, because the form view looks at the data and displays the data. It's just an easier way of looking at your data. The form view and the table view are the same thing. So one of the things that we want to do on the form view is that we currently have Robert and George and Sally and Jane. Well, we need to add Fake Fakerson. So we need to add the new student, Fake Fakerson. So to create the new student, Fake Fakerson, we need to create a new record. And to do that, we could do one of several things. You can skip to number 5 and then type in their new number. you can click on create a new record. There are lots of ways that you can create a new record. Easiest, I think, is to click on a new record. So like I said in the book, on page 12, on home, in records, click new. And then we want to add the information for Fake Fakerson. He's student number 5. His first name is Fake. His last name is Fakerson. And his email address is fake.fakerson@fake.com. I really hope that there isn't somebody who actually uses fake.fakerson@fake.com, because that is what Safeway and CVS and all of the all of the stores that give you free stuff if you give them their email address. That's the email address that I give them. So if you are Fake Fakerson, I'm really sorry. I've been, sending you lots of spam for many, many, many years.
You're getting them points.
I know, I'm giving them points at the store. Exactly. That's right.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Then we should.
How do you add the new student?
To add the new student again, it's on page 12, but I click on the new, home, new, creates a new record, and then I enter in the record. And one of the things you will notice is that I put in my new record here, right? So when I go back to my table view, where is it? This is one of the stupidest things about Access. Access does not automatically update itself. You must click refresh all in order for it to update itself. It's actually there. And if I were to close it and reopen it, it would show up. Why you have to click on to refresh all, I don't know. But like I said at the bottom of page 12, note, you may need to click refresh all to update the records if you switch views. Yes.
We enter student number 5, Fake and Fakerson, and check it. And after that, we should.
That's it.
We enter the name. How can we save it?
It is saved. By entering it, you are saving it.
Or enter what?
By typing in Fake Fakerson, you are saving Fake Fakerson.
Yeah, but before you went to the empty box, there was an empty box. After that one,
That's it.
no.
Well, or hit tab. Yeah.
Tap. When we tap it, it will be safe.
Yeah.
Okay. Then
You can also click save, but clicking save doesn't really, Alt save does is save just makes it go to the next, hitting tab does the same thing.
If you enter, it's also the same.
Yeah, it's the same.
The enter have the same. Yeah?
Well, in this case, yes.
Okay. When we finish this, then we go to the refresh all to see the document.
If you want to see it in the table view, yeah, you go to the table view and click on to refresh all, and the data should be there. All right, we have 3 more things I want to show you how to do. Exercise number 7, page 13. Sorting the data in the table. So if my data are all entered, if I want to sort my data, I can go like by first name. I can click onto the drop-down menu and I can say sort A to Z. And when I do sort A to Z, it will then sort my data. It also now is indicating that my data are sorted. In addition to sorting, on page 14, I can also filter out my data. If I want to filter out my data, I can do that by, for example, removing everybody that does not have an S in their last name. So I could go on last name, and I could go to text filters, and I could say equals, or I could say begins with.
Text filters?
And then I could say begins with S. This is on page 14. I click OK, and it will filter out everybody that does not begin with S. On page 15, queries are used to extract information from the database. Like I said, the primary reason to use a query is to isolate and only use part of the database instead of the entire database. So right at the moment, my database, my table has 4 fields in it. It has the student ID field, and the first name field, and the last name field, and the email address field. Well, I am going to be creating a name tag. And I want that name tag to just have the person's first name and their email address. Those are the only 2 things that I wanted to have, is the first name and the email address. So in order to do that, I am going to create a query that is only going to have the first name and the email address. So I'm going to create a new item. I'm going to click on a create. And I'm going to click on to query wizard. And when I click on a query wizard, I am going to create a simple query. And my simple query is going to only take the first name field and the email address field. And those are the only 2 fields that I'm going to use in this query.
Query design, you said?
Query wizard.
Wizard.
Page 15. Page 15. And then I am going to call this the student, I'm going to call this the first name and email address query. And when I click on to finish, it creates then a query that only shows the first name and email address. So that instead of searching the entire database that includes last names and what else was it? Last names and student ID numbers, I'm only including the stuff that I actually cared about. So that was my query. And then the final thing that I want to do is I want to create a report. So to create a report, I'm going to click on a create, and I'm going to click on a report wizard. Or no, I'm going to click on to labels. Click on to labels. And when I click on the labels, I'm going to pick a label because I'm going to create a name tag. So I'm going to pick one of the labels. Doesn't really matter which one I choose. And I'm going to click OK or next. I'm going to choose the font that I want my label to be in. I'm just going to choose the default. And now I'm going to construct my label. This is on page 18. On my label, I wanted to say, hello, my name is, and then space, and then I want it to take the first name field. So I click on a first name, and I click on to the little arrow. Then I want to have an exclamation point. And then I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to say, my email address is, and then I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to bring the email address so that when I click on to next, and then I could sort it if I want to sort it by something. The field I'm going to name, the label, I'm going to name this as the first name and email address label. Oops, no space at the beginning. And what I have then is a label that I could then print out and use, for our party. To go back to the student information table, I could double click onto the information table and it'll go back to that if that's what I want my view to be. But this is the end of Access Basics. This is the stuff that we wanted to do, because in order to create and understand databases, we need to create tables, we need to do queries, we need to do forms, and we need to do reports. And so once I've done with that, I can go into my assignments. And in Access Chapter 1, Part 1, I am going to upload, or submit rather, my Access Basics, our students database. So again, next week is all lab time. So there's no assignments next week. It's a catch-up week. If you need any assistance on anything at all that we've covered the entire semester, that is what we're going to do on next class. I'm going to, of course, stick around and help anybody that needs any help. When we come back from Halloween, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do on November 7, we're going to do the Bavant publishing database, which is chapter 1. And then we will do a modified version of chapter 2. And then we'll do a completely modified version of chapter 3. And that'll be our access unit. Any global questions other than why is it not working on my screen? All right. I will see you all the next time I see you. Again, my office hours again are, I will be at office hours tomorrow, as I am every Friday, and as well as on Saturday. So if you have questions, come and see me. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day.